In 2015, in the warm, tree-lined streets of Pasadena, California, 30-year-old Hannah Craig prepared her townhouse for a small celebration. She had recently received a promotion at a respected architecture firm, an achievement she met with her usual quiet pride. The guest list was short: a few close colleagues, her aunt from Glendale, and her father, Michael Craig, a retired Marine turned security consultant who still carried himself like a man perpetually braced for war. Hannah lived alone. Her routines were exact, her home minimalist but welcoming, and her demeanor reserved. She kept her life structured, preferring control to chaos, order to vulnerability. Her relationship with her father had always been tempered by a strict formality. After her mother's death, when she was 12, their connection had turned transactional: rides to school, permission slips, tuition forms, financial advice. They shared dinners a few times a year and exchanged brief, thoughtful gifts on birthdays. He called her kiddo. She called him sir once, and it stuck. There had never been a confrontation, but never intimacy either. A week before the dinner, Hannah spent her Saturday afternoon in the basement archive of the firm, sorting through project records and collecting early blueprints for an upcoming internal exhibition. She enjoyed the solitude of the filing room, the smell of paper and metal, the silence broken only by the occasional groan of old ductwork. Among dusty portfolios and model photographs, she found a cardboard box labeled Community Outreach, 1993-1997. It was likely from the era when the firm sponsored local school programs and youth centers. Curious, she opened it. Inside were scattered documents, newspaper clippings, and a handful of VHS tapes. One, in particular, stood out: a faded sticker with the words Children's Mural Day, Altadena Elementary. Hannah recognized the name. It had been her school. On a whim, she took the tape upstairs, converted it using the firm's media station, and began to watch. The footage was shaky and sunlit, filled with little children in overalls painting a long cinder block wall with rainbows, handprints, and oddly proportioned animals. Her own 6-year-old face appeared briefly, smeared with green paint and beaming with pride. She smiled. Then the camera shifted. In the background, partially hidden behind a group of parents, stood her father. He looked younger, more relaxed. His hands were wrapped around those of a woman with dark, curly hair. She leaned into him with a kind of ease that Hannah had never witnessed between her parents. Two children stood beside them, a boy and a girl, both around 6 or 7. The boy had Michael's square jaw. The girl had Hannah's cheekbones. The woman turned toward the camera briefly. Someone called her name off-screen, clear, unmistakable. Loretta. Hannah paused the footage. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. The timestamp in the corner read 1991. That year, her father had been stationed stateside, according to what he once told her. Her mother had already been sick. Hannah remembered the hospital visits, the silence in the house, the long nights spent drawing floor plans of imaginary cities to escape the heaviness. She replayed the scene, watched the hand-holding again, noticed the casual intimacy, the familiarity. It didn't look like an affair. It looked like a second life. She turned the tape over. The label on the case was faded but legible. Under Altadena Elementary was a name in different handwriting: Loretta Brown. Hannah placed the tape back in the box but left it slightly angled. Unfiled. She did not speak to anyone about what she had seen, but that night, alone at her desk, she opened her laptop and typed Loretta Brown, Altadena, California, into a search engine. What returned made her sit back in her chair and press a hand against her chest, as though trying to keep her lungs from collapsing. She kept reading, then bookmarked a link, then closed the lid. Outside, the Pasadena dusk melted into night. Inside, a fracture had begun to spread across the clean geometry of her past. Hannah approached the days that followed with a quiet urgency. Her routines stayed intact on the surface: commute, emails, firm meetings. But behind the calm of her expression, a private investigation began to unfold. Every night, after dinner, and before sleep, she sat in her study with the door closed, tabs open across two monitors, cross-referencing every name and date she could extract from the video. She started with Loretta Brown. The name was too common to yield results without precision, but Hannah narrowed the field using the school district and time frame visible on the tape. Eventually, through an online database of municipal employees, she found a listing. Loretta M. Brown, listed as an accountant at the Oxnard City Health Clinic. Oxnard, a coastal town just over an hour northwest in Ventura County. Zip code 93035. Area code 805. The address associated with Loretta in public property records was a single-story house in a quiet cul-de-sac not far from the ocean. Purchased in 1995, still held in her name. No sign of co-ownership. Hannah scrolled through aerial views of the neighborhood, the faded red roof, the tidy lawn, the palm trees swaying along the sidewalk. She zoomed in on the mailbox. Unremarkable, functional, a container of small truths. From there, the search expanded to other household members. Voter records, local newspaper mentions, public school newsletters. Loretta had two children, Wes and Mariah Brown, both adults now. Wes appeared to be a construction manager, Mariah, a freelance illustrator. A few clicks later, she found them on social media. Hannah froze the moment Wes's profile loaded. The photograph wasn't striking at first glance. Just a man in his late 20s leaning against a pickup truck, smiling at someone just out of frame. But his left wrist rested atop the side mirror, and there it was. A birthmark. Obscure in shape, soft in color, almost a cloud. Identical to the one Hannah had been asked about since childhood. A blot of pigment just beneath the skin, just above the joint. Her pediatrician once called it a rare dermal melanocytosis. She'd always thought of it as a peculiar inheritance from her mother's side. Now she wasn't so sure. She zoomed in on the image, then again. The angle was imperfect, but the shape was unmistakable. Her breath caught. Her chest grew tight. She went further, scanning albums and tags. One photo, dated 2 years prior, showed Wes and Mariah at a barbecue. In the background stood Loretta, older but instantly recognizable. In the caption, someone had written, "Great day with Mom, Mariah, and Papa Mike." The tag linked to Michael Craig's account, long inactive, but still there. A username she had seen once, years ago, when he had tried and abandoned Facebook. Hannah leaned back in her chair. The room suddenly felt airless. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure a version of reality in which the name was a coincidence, the birthmark a genetic fluke, the caption a misprint. But all possibilities collapsed into one conclusion. Her father had been raising a second family, not in secret from the world, but from her. The silence of the room pressed in on her. She looked around at the space she had made for herself, every angle carefully designed, every shelf curated, every piece of furniture a choice. Yet the foundation beneath it all felt cracked now, like an old building held together by habit and denial. She didn't sleep that night, nor the one after. She lay in bed, watching the ceiling shift in moonlight, playing and replaying scenes from childhood. Her mother coughing in the bathroom during chemo treatments, her father gone on business trips, the empty seat at the school play, the missed birthdays explained by scheduling conflicts. She had believed all of it, or wanted to. Some nights she pictured Loretta receiving calls from Michael, while Hannah and her mother waited for him to return. She imagined dual holidays, alternate weekends, a man compartmentalizing entire lives into parallel scripts. But what disturbed her most was the idea that her mother, Lauren, might have known, and chosen silence over confrontation. Hannah began to understand that her childhood had been defined not just by absence, but by design. The reality of her family had not collapsed. It had been built this way from the beginning, hidden, sectioned off, like an unpermitted wing of a house no one was supposed to explore. Until now, Hannah had always been methodical in her work, and this dinner was no exception. She framed it as a celebration, nothing too formal, but significant enough to justify the effort. Her recent project had been featured in a prominent design journal, and she used that as a legitimate excuse to gather people. The official story was one of professional success. The real reason was far more personal. She compiled the guest list with precision. Her father, Michael; her father's sister, Aunt Judith; her partner, Daniel; a few colleagues from the firm who had become close over the years; two family friends who had known her since childhood. That accounted for 8. The remaining 6 seats were more delicate. Under the guise of a community event honoring veterans and their families, allegedly organized by a nonprofit group she fabricated, Hannah drafted and sent a carefully worded digital invitation to Loretta Brown. She addressed it broadly, expressing appreciation for military families and inviting them to a private dinner in Pasadena, recognizing the contributions of Marine veterans and their children. It included a firm RSVP link, a map, and a line about photography for archival purposes. She also invited Wes and Mariah. Their names were included on a generic family list, giving the impression that multiple guests from various branches of service would be in attendance. The tone was casual, yet respectful. It was the kind of email that would be easy to accept, harder to question. The venue was her own home. She reconfigured her dining area to accommodate a long table that stretched diagonally across the room, brushing against the edges of the bookshelf and the wide bay window. She borrowed chairs from neighbors, selected a tablecloth in a muted cream linen, and arranged place settings for 14, each one identical, from the polished flatware to the crystal water glasses and the folded napkins placed with millimetric accuracy. Name cards were simple white cards with first names only. No last names, no titles, no family indicators. Just Judith, Daniel, Wes, Loretta. An intentional ambiguity woven into every detail. She hired a videographer through a local media student network, requesting they record footage for a supposed company reel on architectural storytelling through shared spaces. She provided a list of interview questions and asked them to remain discreet, capturing moments and reactions without drawing attention. The camera was mounted in the corner of the living room, steady and silent, its red light barely visible. On the day of the dinner, she wore a navy blue dress with a high collar and minimal jewelry. She spent the morning arranging flowers, neutral whites and greens, then checked the lights, adjusted the camera angle, and tested the acoustics with a soft clap of her hands. The air smelled faintly of citrus and rosemary from the roasted vegetables warming in the kitchen. Guests arrived gradually, coats draped over arms, smiles offered with wine bottles and congratulations. Michael was one of the first, dressed neatly as always, with the posture of someone who still measured every room for exits. He embraced Hannah briefly, made polite small talk with Daniel, and settled into his seat without suspicion. At 6:47 p.m., Loretta entered. She wore a coral blouse and carried a bottle of Merlot. Her expression was warm, her body language relaxed. Beside her walked Mariah, wearing a slate gray blazer over a floral dress, and behind them, Wes, taller than both, nodding as he stepped inside. They scanned the room with polite curiosity, unfamiliar faces mingling in conversation. No one questioned their presence. No one recognized the strangers across the table. Hannah watched from her seat in the center, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her plate. The table, so carefully arranged, stretched like a stage. Conversations overlapped, silverware tapped against ceramic, glasses clinked. But beneath the noise, patterns emerged. She studied the glances, how her father's gaze lingered a second too long on Loretta before darting away, how Wes and Mariah mirrored some of her own facial movements, how laughter echoed in nearly identical rhythms, intonations aligned, familiar gestures crossed lines that shouldn't have existed. The videographer drifted quietly, recording the invisible thread pulling through the air. Hannah smiled faintly, as if acknowledging something only she could see. The architecture of the evening held for now. 14 seats, 14 faces, 2 families in a single room. And no one, yet, had spoken the truth aloud. The moment of rupture began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A lull in the conversation, the faint clatter of a fork dropped on a plate, a shift in posture so slight it could have passed as nothing. But Hannah saw it. She saw the way her father's eyes froze, mid-sentence, as Loretta's voice carried gently across the table. He turned slowly toward the source of the sound, confusion flickering across his face, then recognition. Then the color drained from his skin, and he sat back in his chair, like a man caught in a current he had once controlled but no longer could. Loretta stood a few feet outside the main arc of conversation, a glass of red wine suspended in her hand, her eyes searching the room, unsure now of where she belonged. For a long second, no one said anything. Then Wes, trying to bridge the unfamiliar silence, introduced himself again with a smile toward the group, but his voice trembled. Mariah gave a half laugh and looked around, sensing something had shifted. The warmth in the room had cooled, drawn out by a presence no one could yet explain. Then came the crack, small, sharp, human. Mark, a family friend's teenage son, who had once been Hannah's student in a local summer program, pointed across the table and said her name aloud, confusion on his face as he asked why someone from his school was here at a veteran family dinner. That sentence, casual and naive, cracked the surface. Heads turned, eyes moved like searchlights. Guests began to glance from face to face, from Loretta to Michael, from Wes to Hannah, to the matching profiles and mirrored gestures. Hannah did not speak. She reached for the serving spoon, calmly scooped roasted carrots onto her plate, and placed them gently beside her fish. Her expression didn't change. She didn't answer the question. She didn't need to. Her father shifted in his chair, attempted to rise, his hand moving slightly toward the table's edge as if to ground himself before speaking. But Hannah raised her hand, not in anger, not in command, simply to indicate that his words were not necessary here, that he had already said enough, through omission, through decades, through design. At that moment, the television in the corner of the room flickered to life. No announcement was made, no one acknowledged it, but the guests turned instinctively as the screen began to play a silent slideshow. A sequence of photographs, curated by Hannah in the preceding nights, filled the frame. Black and white snapshots, sun-washed film strips, Polaroids with curling edges, images from 2 childhoods unfolding in parallel. Her own birthday party at age 5, paper crowns and cupcakes. A similar photo of Wes at what could only have been the same age, with the same shy smile and cake-smeared chin. The transitions were slow, deliberate. Each image was followed by another echo of it, a pose mirrored, a costume repeated, a backyard that looked eerily familiar. There were no captions, no narration, only timestamps in the corner, some faded, others crystal clear. 1992, 1994, 1996. Faces changed, grew, and separated by geography, yet aligned by genetics. Those who looked closely saw it. The unmistakable likeness, the same curl in the jawline, the same shadow over the brow, the same man reappearing again and again in both timelines. The room quieted into an almost sacred stillness. No one reached for more food. No one raised a glass. Even the clink of ice in a water pitcher felt too loud. Loretta watched the screen without blinking. Her face, once open and gracious, closed in on itself. Realization bloomed, not of Hannah's identity perhaps, but of her own displacement, of what had been orchestrated here tonight. She set her glass down on the credenza and stepped back. No words, no accusations, just a small, restrained nod toward no one in particular before she walked out the front door, leaving it slightly ajar. Wes followed. Then Mariah, her expression unreadable, carrying her jacket over one arm. One by one, the guests made their excuses. Quiet, tense, hurried. Some offered nods of sympathy to Hannah. Others avoided her gaze entirely. The chairs scraped against the hardwood floors in uneven waves as the gathering dissolved. Only Michael remained seated, hunched now, hands clasped in front of him on the edge of the table. His plate sat untouched, the fish grown cold, the wine glass half full. He looked at the television, then at the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply existed in the ruins of a dinner he had never imagined would come. Hannah stood and walked to the window, drawing the curtain halfway closed. Outside, the last taillights disappeared into the night. The house was still. The table, once perfectly set, was now cluttered with silence. No one had made a toast. There had been no laughter after dessert. Only the heavy truth, served without ceremony, consumed by all. The room had emptied, but the evening was far from over. Michael remained at the table, motionless, a silhouette caught between the flickering light of the television and the deepening dusk beyond the curtains. The wine bottle on the sideboard had tipped slightly during the exodus, and now, with a slow rhythm, droplets slid into the bowl of a forgotten glass. The sound filled the silence like a metronome marking the unraveling of something long, held together by willpower and pretense. He tried to speak. Once. Then again. Each attempt withered in his throat. The words, once tools of control, now felt foreign and hollow. Across the table, Hannah sat with her hands folded, gaze unwavering. She didn't answer, didn't prompt, didn't ask for an explanation. She simply watched him. Not as a daughter waiting for comfort, but as a witness documenting collapse. The few remaining guests, those who had lingered out of confusion or stunned politeness, began to murmur among themselves. They spoke in half-whispers, pulling pieces of the puzzle from thin air. Someone mentioned seeing Michael once at a hardware store an hour outside Pasadena, with a woman they had assumed was a coworker. Another recalled a Christmas when he'd missed the family gathering due to last-minute travel, only now realizing that travel might have had a name. Loretta had left behind more than her silence. On the edge of the table, under a linen napkin, she had placed a small photo album. Its cover was faded navy blue, the kind given as thank you gifts by wedding photographers or school portrait companies. Someone picked it up, thumbed through the pages. Inside were snapshots of holidays, birthdays, school plays. Images of Wes and Mariah opening identical gifts Hannah had once received. The same model telescope, the same book, inscribed with a near-identical message. Pictures of Michael sitting beside a different tree, on a different couch, smiling with a different family. As the album passed from hand to hand, voices grew more hushed. The timeline became undeniable. Double holidays, 2 houses, 2 sets of traditions, 2 identities maintained in parallel, sustained by careful scheduling, selective truths, and the unwavering belief that none of it would converge. Michael finally found his voice. He spoke not with confidence, but with exhaustion. He cited pressure, the burden of expectations, how it had started small, innocently even, a mistake, a miscalculation, then a child, then 2, then it had gone too far to undo. He spoke of shame, of fear, of not wanting to lose either side. He framed it as survival, as a failure of courage rather than intent. But the words didn't land. They hovered and dissipated. Hannah's sister rose from her seat, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Her face was pale, streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She didn't speak to anyone. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the night without closing it behind her. Michael watched her go, a flicker of recognition, perhaps regret, perhaps resignation, crossing his face. He looked back at Hannah, but she remained still. She had stopped expecting answers the moment he stood in that room and pretended not to know the people across from him. The photo album remained open on the table, a 2-page spread showing birthday cakes with different icing but the same age candle. The same man behind each child. The same eyes, the same smile. 1 person, 2 lives. And now, No more performance. Just silence and the debris of all he thought he could hold without consequence. Hannah didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She let the truth do the work. It needed no embellishment. The facade he had constructed over decades, meticulously layered, reinforced with charm, buried under logistics, had finally collapsed. Not with an explosion, but with a long, quiet breath. 6 months later, Hannah completed the restoration of a 1930s post office in Santa Paula. The building had been slated for demolition before a preservation grant gave it new life. Its bones were solid, its facade weary. She had approached the project like an archaeologist more than a designer, peeling back layers of drywall and paint to expose what time had hidden. Her work was precise, reverent, almost ceremonial. She left the original terrazzo floors untouched. She recreated the plaster cornices by hand, but it was the stained glass that became her quiet signature. In the northeast window, above the old mail sorting room, she embedded a shape into the composition, a small silhouette of a house with two doors. The symbol was subtle, nearly lost in the geometry of red and amber panes, but those who noticed it always asked. When pressed, she simply said it represented a layered home, a house not defined by walls, but by contradictions. No one questioned her further. Her father never reached out again. After the dinner, he had vanished into a kind of self-imposed exile. The family heard he had moved to Arizona, sold off what little he had left in Pasadena, and cut ties with both families. Loretta never responded to the email Hannah sent a month after the gathering. Mariah had quietly unfriended her on social media. Wes deleted his profile entirely. Hannah didn't pursue contact. Instead, she turned inward. On a gray Sunday in early autumn, she uploaded a short film to Vimeo. It was 12 minutes long. There were no faces, no names, just footage, cut carefully, layered with ambient sound and wind through trees. The opening scene showed the corner of a dining table, 14 plates laid out, one slightly off-center. A slow pan across a hallway lined with shadow. Snippets of the dinner footage appeared, mostly hands passing dishes, glasses raised mid-gesture. Then flashes of staircases, both real and sketched, each one leading upward but split at the landing. Forked paths. Nowhere to rest. The final image held the screen for almost a full minute. A blueprint of a modest house, duplicated and overlaid with translucent lines. 2 front doors, 2 chimneys, 1 shared foundation. The screen faded to black. In white serif text, the closing line read, "One house is not always one truth." The video spread without noise, picked up by architectural forums, shared in newsletters and academic circles. Some praised its symbolism. Others called it disorienting. One critic wrote, "This is what familial fracture looks like when reimagined as spatial narrative." Another called it a haunting ode to the unseen rooms we grow up inside. Hannah read none of it. She didn't need to. The film was not a confession, not a warning, not even a reckoning. It was a record, a private archive where no labels were required, where the weight of the unsaid could settle without resistance. In it, she had placed every silent question, every unearthed contradiction, every echo of a man who lived 2 lives and left them both hollow. She never used her father's last name again. In her new projects, she signed only Hannah. No middle initial, no suffix. Her name had become something she built with her own hands, measured, tested, reinforced. A structure that would not collapse,